When people ask me what my race is, I used to give them two answers. Short answer, I was raised culturally Khoikhon Athabascan. Long answer, I'm Athabascan, Russian, Tsimshian, Scottish, English, and French, to the best of my knowledge. I used to add, embarrassingly, basically I'm Heinz 57, until my grandfather corrected me one time. He said, Misty, you are a world citizen. I've since adopted world citizenship as a part of my identity, so today I'm talking to you as a human, an individual, and as a mother. I've had many jobs in my life. The two most significant ones have been raising 3 sons and working to free the Fairbanks Four. In 1998, my toddler and I lived in a low-income or a low-cost apartment complex inhabited by mostly indigenous people. For those of you who don't know, Fairbanks summers are really hot. But because the season is so short, we don't have air conditioning. We'd escape the heat by sitting outside on the porch steps. My not quite 2-year-old son was already so situationally aware that he spotted a police car before anyone else, grasped the hand of the closest adult, and pulled them towards the door of our home, chanting, "Po-po, side, go." Before he had even learned to enunciate or formulate complete sentences, he'd already learned about the inequities people of color face. So I wanted my son to grow up in a world where the police department, the police officers and justice department would protect him in dangerous situations. But the reality is that there are systematic ideologies that shape the perceptions of all people. Perceptions that rely on false narratives and exclude situational factors. Acting on ideologies, prejudice, and race and microaggressions, biases, can lead to unconsciously committing microaggressions. Racial microaggressions are the brief and everyday slights, insults, indignities, and denigrating messages directed to people of color. The list may seem clear-cut and easy to identify, but it'll shock you to hear that it's most often done unconsciously because they're below the conscious awareness of the aggressor. There are 3 types of microaggressions. Microassaults, which are overt and obvious. They're intended to hurt. It's like using racial slurs, mascots, things like that. And then there are micro-insults. They're demeaning actions directed at someone's heritage or identity. And they're often thinly veiled as compliments. Then we have micro-invalidations. They discount the thoughts, feelings, and/or reality of a person of color's life experience. Racial microaggressions steal the power, an individual's power to create and encompass their own identity. In October 1997, George Frese, 20 years old, Marvin Roberts, 19, Kevin Pease, 19, and Eugene Vent, 17, today collectively known as the Fairbanks Four, were arrested and jailed for a murder lacking any empirical evidence. Detectives and prosecutors provided the eyewitness testimony of an intoxicated man claiming to see at a superhuman distance, and 2 coerced confessions of intoxicated young men. According to the innocenceproject.org, of all wrongful convictions which were overturned by DNA evidence, eyewitness testimony accounts for 70%, and false confessions count for 63% in homicide cases. The detectives created a false narrative, and they wouldn't allow anyone to deviate from it, to include the Fairbanks Four, the eyewitness, and the nearly 30 alibis. They used verbal threats to influence any alibis that came forward. One such alibi was a 14-year-old girl who was denied the right to have her mother present. That interrogation ended with her crying and screaming in the corner of the room. How could I, as a mother, teach my children to trust those who should be most feared, those who wouldn't acknowledge our humanity? But despite all this, as a mother, I had to make sense of the situation. I had to know there was some way that I could protect my children. So I rationalized that the Fairbanks Four shouldn't have been out that night. They shouldn't have been drinking, and they shouldn't have trusted the police. Rather, they should have invoked their rights to silence and counsel. As a solution-oriented person, I figured that if I improved myself and protected my children, that I could keep them safe. I sheltered them, and I raised them to see the beauty in different colors, different physical features, and different cultures of people. I told them that they could be anything that they wanted to be, but in order to succeed, they had to work harder, they had to be smarter, and they had to know how to act like the racial majority. I wanted to raise my children to be strong. But instead, I taught them how to be afraid of their own physical features and skin color. I trained them to speak to police officers and warn them, be careful who your friends are, because you can be hurt by others. I told them, you need to be careful, you're Native, and people will harm you just because you are. What I now know is that through internalized oppression, I taught my children to fear. I taught my children to avoid and to run. I taught my children that they are less than human. In 2011, my best friend April and I discussed the wrongful conviction of the Fairbanks Four. Our fear was so overwhelming that we spoke in whispers. But as we spoke, my voice began to rise with the anger inside of me. Who will protect my sons? My brothers, my sisters, my cousins, my family, our friends from a system that claims to protect but instead victimizes so many. It was a statement more than a question. But April replied firmly, Misty, we will. We have to. I have to be honest. It was a cause that I was afraid of. After all, what could I do? I didn't have any power. I actually hoped that she'd forget about it or brush it under the rug like so many of our other lofty plans. But this time she didn't. From the beginning, it was a human movement, and our target audience was everyone. We let the story tell itself by giving voice to those involved, by using the facts of the case, and by using scientific empirical evidence, in the hopes that those who heard the message would see the truth of 4 innocent men wrongly convicted. In 2013, I went back to college for my bachelor's in psychology. I researched a different aspect of the Fairbanks Four case at every opportunity. I wrote about it in papers. I talked about it in presentations. I talked to people anyone who would listen, and even those who didn't listen. I did so much research. I had to understand how so many people, the detectives, the prosecutors, the judges, the jurors, the court of public opinion, could all convict these men of murder without any DNA evidence linking them either to each other or to the crime scene. I had to find out how nearly 30 alibi witnesses could be discounted when a prosecutor simply insinuated that natives lie for other natives. What I now know is that it's a systematic problem that is caused by racial ideologies. Racial ideologies that come from just everyday learning. We're all subject to it. Later in 2013, the Alaska Innocence Project filed a post-conviction relief on behalf of the Fairbanks Four. Included was the written confession of William Holmes, who named himself, Jason Wallace, and 3 others as the actual perpetrators of John Hartman's murder. That's when the case blew up in the media and the conversation grew. The number of supporters also grew, especially in the racial majority. They wrote about it in the media. They wrote about it in social media, in the Facebook posts. They shared Facebook posts, attended rallies and fundraisers. 2 years later, the hearing finally took place in October 2015, after 18 years of wrongful imprisonment. Overwhelming evidence of innocence, police misconduct, and prosecutorial misconduct was shared. At the end of the hearing, the judge said that he would take his time to carefully decide what evidence to include. In early December, news of a settlement hearing leaked to the media. But the day before, the judge canceled the hearing, and he shared his reasons why. It appeared that the state was wanting to continue asserting the guilt of the Fairbanks Four. The public, now a racially diverse group of supporters, were outraged. And despite nearly 20-degree below temp weather, a group of supporters gathered at the courthouse doors. They called out the justice system, the attorney general, and the governor. They demanded justice. On December 18th, a settlement was reached. The Fairbanks Four would maintain their innocence and have their records completely cleared in exchange for agreeing not to sue the state or any of its entities. The words of the judge will always ring clear in my memory when he said, "Take those shackles off." I felt my own invisible shackles falling away. Institutional racism is a countrywide epidemic with very real consequences for all of us. The Fairbanks Four were released when all Alaska citizens stood in solidarity. My involvement with the Fairbanks Four case has taught me how to better deal with inequities and improve them. I have 5 points to share with you. Number 1, question what you're told and what you think you know. Number 2, engage in courageous conversations regarding race, inequities, and microaggressions. 3, become an ally. Remember to see each person as an individual, and remember that the racial system affects each individual's life experience differently. 4, become allies for positive change in the aggressors. And number 5, be aware of, address, and change your own prejudice and biases. Inequities are a large-scale societal issue, and it seems impossible to affect, but the truth is, only you, each one of you, can change it. And only by looking past our assumptions can we truly see each other as really human.